Hi, class. I hope you all had a wonderful weekend and I hope you are ready to begin on chapter 1. In this particular chapter 1, we lay a sociological framework in order to understand race and ethnicity. When it comes to the stranger as a social phenomenon, it is important to deal with the issue of similarity and attraction. People tend not to break off into random groups, but what does happen is people like those who like themselves. For example, if a female walks into a room and on one side there is a group of men and on the other side there is one lone female, most of the time the woman will go to the single female sitting in the room versus the group of men. People don't break off into random groups, but they search for something that is similar to themselves. The pull for us to break off into groups is so strong it has even been seen on Hollywood movies. For example, during the original Planet of the Apes, despite the fact that people were dressed up as primates, when the director yelled cut in the movie, the pull for them to break off into groups was so strong that these people took their breaks depending on the primate they were dressed up as. For example, orangutans were over here, chimpanzees were over here. So that really does speak to an internal instinct that we have as people to go to those that we perceive are like ourselves. Strangers, or those we perceive as strangers, often encounter what is known as social distance. Social distance is the degree of closeness or remoteness individuals prefer in interaction. For example, if you met someone of a different faith, would you be okay with working with them? Would you be okay as having them as a neighbor? Would you be okay with even marrying someone of a different faith? Your response to those questions uh, really says what level of social interaction you will tolerate from another person. And in sociology, that is known as social distance. If you look at table 1.1 that I put on your PowerPoint slides, you will find that some racial and ethnic groups have decreased or increased in social distance over the years. For example, this has been the first time in a number of years that African Americans have been in the top 5. So a low uh, level of social distance indicates that this is a very accepted group. However, if you look down and you see Muslims and Arabs, you will find that they are now towards the bottom. Obviously, world events such as 9/11, political turmoil has impacted the social distance of Muslims and Arab Americans. So this scale is not ironclad or set in stone. It can change over time. Perception strongly impacts the way we deal with strangers and groups of people. In sociology, there is a word known as categoric knowing. Categoric knowing is the use of individual characteristics as a group characteristics. It's almost like stereotyping, but not quite. For example, when it comes to categoric knowing, if you met someone from a different country and you knew nothing about them except for what they did, you would assume that whatever they did is a representation of the entire group. For example, you might see someone from North Korea eating a slice of pizza. And you don't think, hey, well, this individual just likes pizza. You think, well, North Koreans like pizza. So that's a difference between being an outsider in a group because the outsider, the sociological stranger, becomes the representation for the entire group to someone who is not familiar with that group. In addition, strangers do not understand the world in the same way that people from a native area do. In fact, they lack what is known as intersubjective understanding. They do not know the history of a place. For example, we all know about standard English. And if you're speaking to a foreigner and you're using standard English and they know English, they might be able to communicate with you very well. However, if you started talking a regional dialect within the United States or started using slang, well, someone else in the United States might get your points, but they, as a foreigner, might not because they're not familiar with the same history that you have as a native person. So, how does one become a sociological stranger or an outsider? Well, it can happen with just one word: migration. Migration is the movement of people from one area to another. Immigration, with an E, describes people who are leaving a region or territory. Immigration with an I describes those people who are coming into a new territory or region. Most groups fall into one or two categories. They either belong to the dominant group or minority group. A dominant group is a group that has the most control or power over their own lives or can exert power over the lives of others. If you look on the slide entitled Dominant Group, you have an image that we traditionally think of in the United States, represented by the white male. However, if you go to a different geographic location, such as Rwanda, you see that the face of the dominant group member is much, much different. So, what I want you to know is that dominant group membership can change over time or change depending on your geographic location. It is not set in stone. There are five main characteristics that set apart the minority group from the dominant group. One being unequal treatment from the larger society. Two, they are easily identifiable in that society, either by a physical trait or a cultural characteristics. For example, if you think about the Amish and how their clothes make them distinguishable from larger society. Three is a sense of group identity or solidarity. Typically, minority group members are aware of their social status. Four is ascribed status. Ascribed status means that you are born into this social category. For example, being born a woman or being born of Latino descent. Number five is endogamy. Endogamy deals with the intermarriage rate of a minority group. For example, do Asians marry other Asians? Do blacks marry other blacks? Do Jews marry other Jews? Do Hispanics marry other Hispanics? Typically, when a group is discriminated against, they are not allowed to interact with another group on the same level or a more intimate level. Asian Americans, for example, used to have one of the highest endogamy rates, where Asians would marry other Asian Americans. But because they are more socially accepted now in our society, they have a high level of interracial marriage. On the slide entitled Types of Subordinate Groups, what you do find is a list of minority groups, but I just want to emphasize the difference between racial groups and ethnic groups. Now, racial groups basically emphasize the physical appearance alone, and it doesn't take into consideration the culture of a group. So, for example, when we say Black Americans, that could be Jamaican, Haitian, African American, or just African. Each of those represents a distinct ethnic group, but it's all just one racial category. In contrast, an ethnic group is set apart based on things such as clothing, based on things such as food, based on things such as religious beliefs. So ethnic groups is a much broader term and deals with the details of a specific group. So we have all of these different types of groups. So whose perception tends to prevail when we meet people from a different area or when we encounter a different group? Well, probably our own. There's a word in sociology called ethnocentrism, and that means you tend to view the world from the perspective that you grew up in. For example, I was watching a history uh, show one day about barbecue, and that's why you see that picture there. And in this particular documentary, they were going over the different styles of cooking barbecue. And finally, they came to Texas. And the guy says, you know, people in Texas think they cook the best barbecue. I understood what he meant, but because I'm from Texas, I automatically said in my mind, but we do cook the best barbecue. And that's what ethnocentrism does. It basically gives you a lens or perspective and how to see the world, where you think of yourself and your own perspectives as sort of the center of the universe. If I asked you guys about which side of the road is the correct side to drive on, most of you would say the right hand side. But the truth of the matter is that there are other countries that drive on the left hand side. So it's not necessarily that there is a right or a wrong, but it depends on your perspective. It depends on your own background. And that's what ethnocentrism deals with. Once you recognize that there are many ways in which you can view the world, you can better understand people and their behaviors. Cultural relativism basically means that you understand people's behavior in the context of their culture. For example, if you were to give someone else a thumbs up, you're probably just saying good job. But if you were to go over to a foreign country, it could mean something very obscene. Another example is the word bloody. Here in the United States, we just use it as a descriptive term for when something is covered in blood. However, in England, it is deemed a cuss word. This is an example of cultural relativism, understanding something in the context of a culture. Because we have our own perceptions, it is easy for us to come to incorrect conclusions about different groups, especially immigrants. There's something called the Dillingham Flaw, which deals with faulty logic on understanding immigrants. It deals with incorrect assumptions about the past and applying stereotypes of today to compare two completely different groups. For example, it is like saying that current immigrants in our society do not want to learn English, or they don't assimilate as quickly. Well, does this statement take into account that some of the older immigrants already knew English or came from a place that was similar in culture and religious beliefs that is already present in the United States? We need to view the present from a socio-historical context and not just the current stereotypes. Because we live in a world where people have different social perceptions and also have different levels of power, it is easy to understand why sometimes people or groups butt heads. But how do you explain the social ills or social problems in our world? For sociologists, it comes down to three main theories. I have provided a link on your PowerPoint slide. Please watch it as it explains the three main theories: conflict theory, interactionist theory, and functionalist theory. And it also explains how these three perspectives or three theories impact our understanding of social problems.